Journey to the Eternal Kingdom, Chapter 32. Whose land is this anyway? As the boys slept, a fitful but deep sleep of exhaustion, not far from where they rested, stood Paranoid Castle, where the cynical giant lived. Every morning he would awake early and walk up and down his fields in the hope of finding wayward pilgrims on his land. Who do you think he found still asleep as he walked his fields that morning? Poor Kingsley and Hopeful, still tired from their ordeal the night before, were fast asleep when they were rudely awakened by the giant.
"What are you doing on my land?"
The giant said, poking them in their ribs with his huge fingers that felt like wooden beams. The boys explained that they had gotten lost in the storm and would be on their way now.
"You are trespassing, and there is my sign that says no trespassing."
The boys looked at the sign, but before they could say anything else, the giant began driving them before him like cattle. Every time their feet slowed, he poked them with his fingers, which hurt and bruised them.
"You have no right to be on my land, trampling my plans."
The boys had little to say in their defense, for they knew they should not have strayed from the good king's pathway. When they reached the castle, the giant took them down a long staircase. The farther down they went, the darker it became, until soon the boys were unable to see their hands in front of them. At that point, the giant grabbed them by the collars so they could not escape. Soon they stopped and heard the grinding of a metal door. Before they knew what was happening, they were quite unceremoniously thrown into a cell and heard the door slam shut. It took everything Kingsley had not to cry, but Hopeful gave in to his grief and anger at having listened to Kingsley and cried himself to sleep. The boys did not know how long they remained there, for the giant did not come again to either feed them or provide them with water. It was a depressing place, which caused one to doubt themselves and their hopes of reaching the kingdom. Kingsley, knowing they were in this terrible situation because of his love of ease, grew quite depressed. The boys did not know it, but they spent 2 nights and 3 days in the cave before the giant returned. He had finally remembered to tell his wife about the prisoners he had in the dungeon. She was not pleased to hear this, for she said they could have helped clean the castle instead of her doing it all herself.
What? You had them there all this time? Go and fetch them so they can help me with the chores around this castle.
The boys were weak with hunger and were hopeful that the giant had come to feed them. Instead, he dragged them up the stairs and put them to work cleaning their very filthy house. The giant's wife paid close attention to them and told the giant to whip them even when they had done nothing wrong. The boys did their best to avoid his club and whip, but by the end of the day they were faint with exhaustion and hunger. At the end of the day, Cynical dragged them back down to the dungeon and imprisoned them once again. The next day, Cynical came down the stairs to the dungeon again and was completely surprised that the boys were still alive. Hopeful was crying, and Kingsley, knowing it was his fault they were in this position, took courage and begged the giant to have mercy on them. As they were walking up the stairs, Kingsley asked if he might provide them with food, and said they would gladly help with cleaning. This made the giant so angry that he rushed them back into the dungeon and came upon them as if to strike them down with his club. But suddenly his strength failed him, and he barely had time to close the iron gate before crawling back up the stairs.
What happened to him?
The boys thought this strange, but because of their exhaustion, hunger, and despair, they did not dwell on what had happened. You see, the giant did not do well when the weather was fair, and the skies were bright and sunny. During such times he suffered fits of extreme weakness and lost the use of his arms. This was the reason some previous pilgrims had been able to escape him, and the reason he kept prisoners in the dungeon. The darkness was his friend. That night, the giant returned and brought them a bowl of the most foul-smelling liquid you could imagine. The boys knew that it would mean their demise if they drank or ate anything from that bowl. The giant hoped the boys would be so hungry that they would ignore the smell and eat the food anyway. Kingsley was tempted, thinking it might end the misery he was feeling, but Hopeful talked him out of doing something
Maybe
so
I should
foolish
drink this
and reminded
and end
him
this
of
misery
Isaiah
called our life.
40:31.
Don't say that. Have you ever felt completely worn out, not just in your body, but deep in your heart? Sometimes life moves so fast, responsibilities pile up, and our strength begins to fade, even in the darkest seasons. But God gives us a promise in Isaiah 40:31. Those who place their hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not grow faint. When we place our hope in God, He always gently renews our strength. He lifts us above the storm and gives us strength for every step
Hopeful
we
then
take.
reminded Kingsley how he had faced self and defeated him, how he had walked through the valley of death and survived, and how they had met in vain glory because of Kingsley's courage in refusing to deny that he knew the king. The giant and his wife knew that anyone who knowingly ate the food in the bowl would never enter the eternal kingdom. When the giant Cynical returned the following day and saw that the boys were still alive, he spoke with his wife.
These are brave young pilgrims. They are still holding on. It does not seem as if we can drive them to despair.
Take them into the courtyard and show them the bones of the other pilgrims we have killed, which should cause them to lose hope.
That afternoon, Cynical dragged them out of the dungeon and showed them the bones of previous pilgrims. It did indeed cause much fear and grief in the boys' minds, but they kept whispering words of encouragement to each other. Kingsley said as loudly as he
The
could
Lord
muster,
has not
though
given
he
us a
was weak
spirit
from
of
hunger
fear,
and
but of
beatings.
sound minds.
Psalm 31:24. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord.
I do hope in the Lord.
Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. We will not die here. Do you hear me, Kingsley? We will not die here.
Cynical would have beaten them to death, but he felt the weakness beginning to creep into his arms again. So he hurried the boys back down into the dungeon and barely made it to the top of the stairs before his strength failed him. In the dungeon, the boys earnestly began to pray. Something about what Hopeful had said renewed their faith, and they prayed with an earnestness they had never known before. They realized that if they did not leave this place soon, they would not be able to endure another beating from Cynical and survive. They spent the entire night in prayer, though they could not tell whether it was night or day because it was so dark. Around midnight, Jesus sent an angel to place a thought into Kingsley's mind, that he had a key in his pocket given to him at the Palace of Delight. Kingsley suddenly sat up and began searching his pockets. Sure enough, there was a key.
I have a key that was given to me when I spent time at the Palace of Delight. Faith told me that when my faith was at its lowest, I should use this key. Dare we hope? Let's try it. We have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
They crawled in the direction where they thought the door was. Feeling his way along the rough iron bars, Kingsley found the lock and inserted the key. The lock turned easily without any effort. With their hearts pounding, the boys stepped out of their prison. Stumbling in the darkness and following the direction they had always been led by the giant, they continued until they reached a passageway where a faint light shone. Walking as softly as they could, the young men soon found their way to the door leading to the courtyard. Effortlessly, the door opened with the key without making a sound. There was only one more door to freedom. It would lead them out of the courtyard and into the green meadow. Keeping to the shadows, they walked carefully so as not to stumble over anything that might alert their jailers. The moon shone brightly, and Kingsley feared that if the giant or his wife looked out the window, they would surely see them. Keeping his head down and his eyes alert, he walked cautiously to the last door. At last, they reached it. Kingsley inserted the key, expecting it to turn easily as it had before. But because the lock was outside in the elements, it was stiff. Suddenly, they heard the heavy footsteps of the giant. He had heard the shuffling of feet and realized the boys were escaping.
Oh, please hurry.
It's stuck! I'm trying, but it's stuck!
Try harder. He's coming.
Hopeful grabbed Kingsley's hand with both of his, and together they turned the key. Slowly, it began to move.
Dear Jesus, Please do something to save us.
At that moment, an angel touched the giant, and he lost not only the use of his arms, but his legs as well, and toppled to the ground. At that very moment, the lock gave way, and the door swung open. The boys were free. Grabbing Kingsley's hand, and not knowing where they found the strength to move, much less run, the boys dashed across the broad meadow toward the stile that would lead them back to the king's pathway.